Welcome to the Self-Storage Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Thaddeus Campbell, joined today by Beau Agnello. Really excited to have the COO, I almost said CEO, of Go Store It with me. I was just bragging off camera. I've done this a couple hundred times, and there's no such thing as making a mistake, and I flub his title right off the bat. I was very lucky to be on a virtual summit a few weeks ago with Beau. And he spent almost an hour talking about the operations 2024. What's it like to operate self-storage and Go Store It, 150 plus facilities that they operate around the country. I was blown away by his knowledge. Not only his knowledge, a lot of times when people are talking about operations, it can be easy to kind of get lost in the weeds and get a little technical. Beau was able to present to a group of people on this summit in a way that was very digestible. Someone like me that doesn't have a background in operations was engaged and really enjoyed. So I couldn't help but ask him to come on the podcast. And Beau, thank you so much. You were kind enough to accept the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What did I tell you? Longtime listener, first time caller. So I'll be watching this episode. I try not to miss any.
I appreciate that greatly. It obviously makes me feel good and nice to know that people in the industry are receptive to what it is I'm doing. I love it. I enjoy doing this. And so it's kind of a passion project for me, but it's nice to know that it's being received a little bit too. First thing we always start out with on the podcast, and your story is pretty cool. You know, COO of Go Store It. That's not us. You guys are a top 20 company in self-storage. It's been a journey for you, though. I want you to talk me through, how did you get into self-storage, such a niche industry, and the journey of getting to this place now where certainly widely recognized and respected figure in the industry?
Yeah, so I won't start with my childhood. I'm not a legacy. And when I read a biography or an autobiography, that's always the most boring part anyway. So I'll skip over that. Nobody cares about that stuff, and I don't want to put people to sleep already. But I have been in the industry almost a decade and a half. I started in the industry shortly after the Great Recession, working in a property, sweeping out storage units at Extra Space Storage. I was an assistant manager in the Bay Area, and Extra Space, I was fortunate. They're a company that focuses on internal employee development and was able to move through the ranks and through their development programs. So after being an assistant manager, I was a storage manager and a store manager, and lived on site at a property in an on-site apartment. From there, I was promoted to a district learning specialist, then a district team lead, and a district manager in training. While I was learning the ropes as a district manager in training, my division vice president was Matt Harrington, who's now the COO of Extra Space. So getting to work with Matt felt kind of like getting my master's degree or PhD in storage, to get to learn from Matt and just try to be a sponge and soak up as much knowledge as I could from him as a mentor. From there, moved again, zigzagged across the country for storage. It's been an interesting way to see the United States. Moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, where the company is headquartered and based out of, and was a regional training manager. And I've tried to memorize the states that I covered in that role. It's easier to just call it the Mountain West, but I got pretty good at this. So it was for Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and then just a little bit of Texas, El Paso and Midland, Odessa, Texas, for a training manager role. And then moved back to California with Extra Space as a district manager in the Silicon Valley and San Francisco markets. Then another move again to Chicago. I was a senior district manager for Extra Space in the Chicagoland market. So I had downtown Chicago, the Loop down through the South Side, and then was hiring and training district managers for Extra Space in the Midwest. And then this was my last move with Extra Space, but I moved to Dallas, Texas, and was the operations vice president for the Texas market for Extra Space. So I know that sounds a little crazy, but I've lived in 6 states for self-storage, and every time zone in the contiguous United States now. I have a very patient wife and children that my wife jokes that she doesn't unpack until we've lived in a house for 6 months just to make sure. And then I left Extra Space after about 10 years. It was a tough decision, but wanted to try something more entrepreneurial, moved to the private world in self-storage, and now Chief Operating Officer for Go Store It. We're fully vertically integrated self-storage company based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we were one of the fastest growing self-storage owners and operators in the industry this year, and hoping to repeat that performance in 2025. We have 158 properties in 23 states, adding 7 more properties in the next few weeks. And we're approaching 12 million net rentable square feet of self-storage.
Just a small operation, nothing serious.
Uh, well, I counted the other day. I had to Google it. We have more net rentable square feet than the Empire State Building now in self-storage. So if you filled up the Empire State Building from the ground floor to the ceiling with self-storage, that's about how many units we have across the U.S. right now.
That's a pretty nice mental image to give you an idea where Go Store It's at. All right. You said something here that was something I wanted to talk about anyway, and I'm going to go. I can remember the first time, and I'm super new to this game. 2021 August was when I got into self-storage, and one of the first things I did, in fact, the first thing I did is the company I went to work for sent me a feasibility study from Stephen Ross, another gent who spent a lot of his career with Extra Space and came up through the ranks there, speaks very highly. You mentioned how they're so into employee development, and there's a lot of people in the world of self-storage who benefited from that. But one of the things that jumped out at me in the feasibility study was the idea, and this was 2021 ground up development project feasibility study, saying you should build an on-site manager's place for the manager to live. So I think it's great. You mentioned that when you first became the manager of a location, you were literally living on site. And I want to talk fast forward. It's been 15 years since that happened. How much different? Can you even imagine building a self-storage facility in 2024 with a manager's apartment above the office at the facility?
Yeah, I think it still makes sense in very select high rent per foot markets where it may be difficult to hire or retain talented hourly employees. So it may still make sense in a San Francisco, Hawaii, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, but outside of that, you don't see it all that often now. Who's the quarterback for the Houston Texans? I think he actually didn't his mom. I think she was an on-site manager in self-storage, and he actually grew up in a storage facility. So we count him in the industry.
CJ Stroud, is that who's the quarterback?
Yeah, CJ Stroud grew up in a self-storage facility. So we claim him in this industry now.
Hey, listen, we'll take it. He's got a pretty bright star. You're living in Dallas now.
I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you moved to where I was going to say is we have a partner in our company who's in Dallas. I was on a call with him this morning. It's like 32 degrees down there. So I was going to be surprised you weren't wearing a jacket. This is your East Coast. You're now in the EST time zone.
Yeah, Go Store It has 2 offices. We're in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then we merged earlier this year with Snapbox Self Storage. So we have the Snapbox office in Philadelphia.
So I happened to get connected with Matt Lang a few years ago. Unbelievable guy who was so welcoming to me as someone brand new in the industry. Yet another conversation topic that I wanted to bring up. So I'll talk a little bit about that. 2 pretty big sized operations by themselves within the self-storage world. And you guys earlier this year decided to join forces and merge the 2 companies. Can you talk a little bit about what led to that and why it was a benefit to both groups?
Yeah, the benefit to both groups is that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is more pronounced in self-storage than it ever has been. And the technology gap and the access to resources, you could run a successful management company with fewer assets 3 years ago, 5 years ago. But as the complexity compounds in our industry and the industry changes, storage isn't just storage anymore. It's so many different adjacent technologies that you have to layer into your business. And we realized that the combination of the companies that 1 + 1 could equal 3. And as a larger company with increased scale, we'd have access to more resources to compete. You see this across the industry, and I think it's almost easy to miss how much consolidation has happened in the last few years. I looked up before this. In 2016, the REITs had a 14.7% market share. And today, a little over 8 years later, it's a 37% market share. That's not just happening in the REITs, that's happening across the industry. But if you're competing now against the REITs that have a 37% market share, so there's a much higher likelihood that you're competing against a more sophisticated operator. It's really becoming an arms race. And so it was an opportunity to combine two organizations to make a stronger company. And, you think you've seen the gap between the haves and the have-nots, even in the delta from performance from life storage to extra space. So that's the gap in the sophistication of how you can drive performance from one of the premier flagship operators in our industry. So if you've got that gap from life storage to extra space, you can imagine how pronounced that gap is from number 50 on the top operators list to number 5. I'll bore you with a few statistics here that I grabbed. But the same store pool from life storage after moving to extra space year to date in 2024, NOI has grown by 1.2%. So it was a similar thesis for us. We wanted to combine two high performing companies to compete in the arms race that is the competitive landscape in 2024.
I think it's interesting, and I want to kind of illuminate a little bit. You mentioned technology, and this arms race is not just about who owns the most stores anymore, right? It's about who can deploy technology in a way that's helping to draw customers and keep customers better. We met on the virtual summit, and it was presented by Radius Plus and by LiveSwitch. LiveSwitch wasn't even in this industry 10 months ago. And I can remember distinctly being in Orlando in 2022 at the spring SSA show, and Radius Plus was still brand new. I can remember Tao in his booth. He was all by himself, a one-man show in a little tiny booth. Now they got 3, 4, 5 people manning their booth. They've become such a bigger presence in the industry. How important is data now, and access to data and access to technology and being able to deploy it intelligently in your individual stores?
Yeah, so that was internal discussions that we had when we were meeting with Snapbox. Is where's the sweet spot right now where you have access to the technology that allows you to compete with the top private operators and the REITs? We feel like 5 years ago that number was 50 properties, and today it's 100 properties. And below 100 properties, it's really difficult to have access to the tools, or at least the economies of scale to purchase those tools to operate your business effectively. And so even if we're using the same pricing software or we're using the same facility management software, the bulk purchasing power of a larger portfolio, that sweet spot feels like it's above 100 properties. So I'll answer your question in kind of a roundabout way about that kind of haves and have-nots. So I'm a shameless San Francisco 49ers fan. They're not doing great this year. I still like Brock Purdy, but they're not doing great this season. So we'll call it a rebuilding year, but kind of look at it like Jerry Rice, right? So Jerry Rice, he's number 1 on the career all-time yards list. Number 2 is Larry Fitzgerald. But if you look at the gap between Jerry Rice and Larry Fitzgerald, the gap between number 1 and number 2 is as significant as the gap between number 2 and number 28. And it just feels like that's what's happened as our business has become much more complicated than just 3 walls and a door. And so I'll use my extra space and life storage example again, that just shows how profoundly technology can drive performance. And again, we're comparing an A operator to an A plus operator, but it still feels like going from Jerry Rice to Larry Fitzgerald. So extra space took a handful of test properties in the same markets in which where they had a density of properties from life storage in one market. Half of those properties they converted to extra space, and half of the properties they left as life storage. So the stores that they converted had a 21% increase in organic search after they were converted to extra space. And they averaged over a 6-month period 3 to 4 more rentals per month per property. Same operating platform, but that was with the Extra Space name and brand. So it feels like there's a big earthquake yesterday in San Francisco. It was a 6.6 magnitude earthquake, but it's a logarithmic scale, right? So a 6.0 earthquake is 10 times more powerful than a 5.0 earthquake. And that really feels like an appropriate comparison for our industry where, again, that delta from 1 to 2 and 2 to 50 on the top operators list is so much more pronounced based on the level of sophistication that our industry, again, is just not 3 walls, a door, and a light bulb. And so if you're playing by the rules where you're saying the competitive differentiator that I have for my property is the quality of service and training that I provide for the manager, the free bottle of water that we hand out in the sites, the business cards that we gave to the new apartment community across the street, it's just tough, right? It's like trying to say you're going to open up a competitor to McDonald's because you can make a better cheeseburger. You're missing what's making McDonald's successful. And so that's that gap. And we've seen even on the Snapbox side, the same thing, being able to onboard the properties to our platform. Because the dominance of some of the large operators in this industry comes from how you can rank on Google, your organic rank, your local rank, your paid search, your revenue management, having a high converting website, a strong customer acquisition platform, an in-house high performing call center. And unless you nail all of those, you're missing customers. And we're a high value, low volume business. So the difference in missing 10% of your customers in a month is not, you don't get 1,000 shots, you get 30 a month. And so losing 10% of your business is 3 additional customers. So it all happens at the margin. So that's why it's almost, storage isn't storage. And I've seen that even in just roughly 15 years, where the technology gap has only grown exponentially after COVID. And so for us, humor me for a moment, if we look at the performance of the Snapbox properties after onboarding to our platform, and they've been with us for around 4 months, Snapbox was number 51 on the top operators list. And this was a leading operator in the industry, some of the smartest people in the industry with decades of experience in its management ranks. They had a sophisticated revenue management tool and team. They had an in-house call center that took all of their sales calls for their properties. They had a custom bespoke website. They worked with 2 different digital agencies, Class A assets in major MSAs like Philadelphia, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, New York. These are well operated properties, but again, you look at that kind of logarithmic scale, right, where the 6.0 earthquake isn't twice as powerful as a 3.0 earthquake. It's 1,000 times more powerful. And so I've got this just as a case study. So if you look at the stabilized properties from Snapbox after joining Go Store It, and this, I'll send you these. It almost sounds too good to be true. It exceeded every expectation, but the rentals at the stabilized same store Snapbox properties year over year after joining our platform are up 41.4% year over year. And square foot occupancy has grown 1.6% in that 90-day period relative to a 2.1% decrease prior year. And so that's coming into this slow season where you'd usually expect things to decelerate. Yeah, and we're growing occupancy. So instead of losing occupancy, we've got this 3.7% positive delta to prior year and equivalent gains in top line rental income growth. So it's just, I say all that to just share it's storage isn't storage anymore. And the gap in what you need and the resources that you need internally, not even just access to agencies. And I don't mean this to be a commercial for Go Store It. I just want to highlight that the impact of the aggressive consolidation in the industry over the last few years.
I love the way you presented it. By the way, I'm a New England Patriots fan, so I can absolutely empathize with the pain of being a San Francisco 49ers fan right now. Of course, I had a 20-year run, so I can't complain that bad, but understand that completely. Fascinating. I love the Jerry Rice analogy, right? Larry Fitzgerald, great receiver, but literally the next 27 guys is the gap. And when I first got in it in 2021, you were still hearing, hey, you can go pound the phones and call mom and pops, and you can buy a value add facility. And as you said, have someone intelligent answering the phone and hand out a bottle of water and a lock, and you're going to be able to value add to that facility. That's not a strategy that's going to bear fruit anymore.
No, and it's difficult even being able to bring in outside experts because they just don't know your business as well as you do. And so in the last few years, the level of sophistication is so, it has exponentially increased to where it's difficult to even bring in an outside agency now that can operate with the same level of sophistication as a large operator, or as one of the REITs. I love when I go to a property and they hand out a fresh baked cookie or an ice cream sandwich. I'm not going to say no to the cookie, but I also don't think that that's the difference in whether you're increasing occupancy or growing your top line year over year.
Listen, as somebody who looks at a lot of underwritings for, I'm usually looking at ground up developments. That's been the area I've been most involved in. The difference between signing up 3 extra people a month is, it's almost staggering in the long term outcome. I mean, if you pump a monthly rental rate from 3% to 4%, the difference in NOI on a project, even in just a 3-year hold, something you're trying to get to, occupancy and economic stability and then sell off, you're talking about on a 100,000 square foot facility, that 1% bump every month, and 3% or 3 new people a month is actually probably more than 1% in most facilities. You're talking about multiples of millions of dollars of value added to that facility.
Yeah, and you're also talking about your competitors operating with a higher level of sophistication too. So you're more likely to be surrounded not just by the mom and pops where you're trying to, or the independent operators where you're trying to add value, but the competitors around you are going at an equivalent level. So it is not nearly as fragmented a market as it was previously, and I think that also shows the how much the market has changed in customer acquisition strategy, where even if you do everything right in your property, so much of your business is your customers have made a purchasing decision before they ever get to your property. So again, even if you do everything right at the facility, you nail it. If 70-80% of your customers are renting or deciding to rent before they ever step in, it doesn't matter how great your manager is. It doesn't matter how good your office looks. It doesn't matter how well manicured your lawn is, or how good your signage looks. And it's been surprising how few customers walk in. We track the typical number of customers that open the door every day at our facilities, and for us, it's about 3 customers per day that open the door, and that's new customers as well as existing customers, so sales and service. It's a dramatic transformation from 10 years ago.
I was going to ask a question about kind of where we're going demographics wise, right? Baby boomers are kind of aging out of being storage, people that have storage and didn't, a big percentage of baby boomers didn't use storage. I think 6% is the number that I've heard. My generation, Gen X, we're about 12, but we're getting older now. Like, we're getting to that point where not as big. Now you have millennials and you have Gen Z, and they operate significantly different. I can say this as someone who's worked with a bunch of Gen Z and millennials, different habits and ways they go about things. And I think this speaks to what you're talking about, that, millennials and Gen Z much more likely to do business without ever talking to somebody, right? Buy something online, rent something online, pick their storage facility, show up at the facility without ever talking to someone. How has Ghost Store been able to kind of bridge that gap between, listen, 10 years ago, we were all getting frustrated because you couldn't get someone on the line for customer service. Now you go online and do everything without ever speaking to somebody. How do you make that transition, and how did you guys do it successfully?
Yeah, so for us, it was trying to look at the role of the traditional property manager being the be all end all for the customer, and that all interactions eventually, or all roads lead to Rome, or all customer interactions eventually led to the property manager. And it was getting more comfortable with a decentralized model. I think that it's easy to put those models into a box and say you're remote or you're unmanned or you're virtual, you're hybrid, you're kiosk, you're non, and I could go on. And for me, the takeaway or the learning was that we had to get more comfortable doing business outside of the office, and not just remote rentals, but giving customers more options for how they could transact business with us and how they could rent with us. And it's not to say that the property manager still isn't critical or core to our operation, but across our portfolio right now, our typical property manager only gets 5 walk-in rentals every month. So we had to be able to meet our customers where they were coming to us. But there were growing pains associated with separating or decentralizing that model out of the rental office, where you would have this property manager that was an artisan and they had to juggle collections calls, your auction files, your existing customers, your new customers. They had to be out there with a can of spray paint, restriping the parking spaces in the parking lot. And they have to be an excellent salesperson, and they also need to learn to love cleaning a bathroom. And finding that person is not easy, especially when you're competing against Target and Starbucks for hourly wages. So for us, it was getting comfortable with the role of the manager being more specialized to be property focused and adding resources in other areas of our business to support those customers. I grabbed a copy of Snapbox's facility operations manual for the property manager when we took over management of the portfolio. And I used an online tool. I didn't count the words, but I can tell you that there were as many words in the facility operations manual for Snapbox for how to run a storage facility as the books of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck and Animal Farm by George Orwell, taking you back to high school, and almost as many words in the manual for how to run a property as The Great Gatsby. And that's real. And that's not unique to Snapbox, but that's how difficult it is to run a property when you have to juggle all of those tasks. Oh, and by the way, most operators are paying their employees under $20 an hour for a $15 million investment. And then you're turning over staff, constantly trying to hire, train new employees, backfill. Your district manager may only be in the property once a month. Maybe you get a mystery shop to see how that person is doing, and they get a week, possibly 2 weeks of training on how to run this $15 million investment. And then it's, here's the keys, good luck. And so that is how our industry operated for 35 years. But that was still the best properties usually had the best managers. So it was a shift in our business. Okay, if only 5 customers are walking in to rent a unit every month, we need to.
Best person.
Is that where you want your best person? And how do you define what the best person looks like? Your best person in that role now may be somebody that's really capable at fixing things around the property and lowering your operating expenses, but you need to proactively screen, hire, promote for that role. And now you're decentralizing the other tasks. That might not be the person that you want doing your auction files. And how do you turn that from a disadvantage to an advantage? So for us, again, it meant reskilling and internalizing our call center and giving customers longer hours to rent units with us, more flexibility to rent units over the phone, on the website, through click to chat, and really, really long hours of support. And so if it is midnight on a Thursday and you make a reservation, you'll get a text message from an employee at Ghost Store checking in with you. We're not going to call you, but we're going to follow up with you. You're going to get an email and you're going to get a text message, and we're going to answer any questions you have and try to earn your business. So again,
person sending that text message and sending that email.
Yeah, it's a real person reaching out to you. And similarly, I couldn't tell you why we have so many people doing click to chat on our website at midnight, but it's one of the busier hours that we have. I have theories. I won't share them here out of lightness, but you're talking to a live human being. And again, if we're talking about the difference of 3 rentals per month is a 10% increase in your sales, if Go Store It is following up with you at midnight, you've got a live person that can answer questions about the U-Haul because maybe your stuff just got thrown onto the sidewalk and you got kicked out. But you're talking to one of our employees, and they're going to make sure that we get the right space for you every time. So but that's been the North Star for our company, is trying to replicate that experience of a really skilled, empathetic, talented manager on site, and trying to shift those other areas of the role, not just sales, but also service as well, because you may not want the person that lives or works on site to be making collections calls, to be making sales calls. And it's trying to, again, allocate our resources more efficiently to where our customers are finding us.
So 2 questions I'd love to ask, if you could bear with me for a couple more minutes. The first one is, I know you guys brought your call center, whether it's doing collections calls or it's doing sales calls or live online, chat box, you decided to do that in-house. There are other people that offer that service that you go out and hire. Why did you guys make the decision to do that in-house?
Well, if we use the same call center that everyone else uses, we're going to have the same performance that everyone else has. And what's that saying? That the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Well, I think the definition of insanity in this industry is operating your business the same way everyone else does and expecting that you're going to perform better. But it meant taking bold risks and saying, okay, we all know storage really well. Now we need to know how to run a call center and operate a call center as well as or better than people who are professionals at it. And so there was a risk. There's another expression, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. And so you can say, all right, I'm very happy with how this outside call center is working for us. I know storage best. I should stay in my lane. I'm going to focus on how clean the units are, but you're not going to perform different. And so we needed to lean in harder and fail faster and say, look, we need to just explore disruptions to our business if we want to have superior performance. So, and I'll give you another example, right? So we worked with a digital agency that managed all of our marketing, but if my website looks the same as 3 other competitors' websites in the market, and by the way, that agency is managing our paid search, and I'm not saying that the agencies don't do a good job, but again, we're not going to perform any different than anyone else if we quite literally have the same boilerplate template website that all of the other mid-size operators in the MSA have. So that we applied that philosophy to the call center, applied that philosophy to digital marketing, and said, okay, if we need to fail fast at this, let's build out this team. And when we separated from the agency that we used, the owner of the agency, who's a really smart guy, called me. And by the way, he was probably right when he said this, but he said, I think you're making a mistake. And you're storage guys, you don't know websites. But we needed to learn, and we needed to learn fast, because we knew our business better than anyone else did. We knew our markets, we knew our properties, and that served only to really light a fire of, now it's okay, well, now it's personal. Now we're going to set out to prove you wrong. And so the results of that, when we internalized our paid search and our customer acquisitions, well, yeah, it was a little bumpy at first, but after we left the agency, our non-brand conversions from our website, so non-brand would be customers that are searching for storage near me, or storage in a zip code, or storage Charlotte, North Carolina. They're not searching a company name. That's where most companies invest the bulk of their customer acquisition budget. After we left an agency, our non-brand conversions increased year over year by 64%, and our cost per conversion decreased by 26%. And if you look at our impression share, our non-brand campaigns, so again, the customers that are searching just storage near me, if you draw a geofence around our properties and you say, who's on top, who's getting the most impression shares in those advertising markets, our campaigns outrank for impression share, top of page rate, and absolute top of page rate. We outrank Public Storage, Extra Space, CubeSmart, Life Storage, and all of the aggregator sites. So, again, if you look across the industry and you kind of see the same, again, the definition of insanity would be saying, I'm going to use the same agency, the same call center service. I'm going to use the same mystery shop company. And you can go down the list, right? There are only really 2 to 3 providers in every vertical in this industry. And you just play this game of musical chairs where every few years you switch from one to the other because your rate got raised, or maybe you don't like your account manager. but we had to operate different. It was a means of it was the only way to differentiate ourselves when you have a commodity or a fungible product.
So I was going to ask the last question. First of all, I'm gonna follow that up by saying this has played out in you guys' results because you've been more successful in leasing up and keeping rates than anybody in the industry in the last year. So that's 100% proven out in the results that Ghost Store's been able to achieve, and you know, fueling the growth you guys have been able to have. I'm close friends with Shimon Cantor, who's a development guy for you guys, and you guys seem to be popping up stores all over the place. Quite frankly, in a time where it's tough to underwrite new builds, which makes sense for you having the success you're having. I was going to ask you the last question. Your growth in your career is amazing to see, right? From sweeping out a store post Great Recession to now CEO of one of the most successful companies right now in storage. I was going to ask you to tell me a couple of things, and I'm going to let you do that. But first, I just want to observe that every single question I asked you today, you had data at hand to answer the question with. And I think that speaks to a lot of why you've been as successful. So kudos to you. I'm even more happy you agreed to come on the podcast now. I was on a webinar last night, and the guy said about 20 minutes worth of stuff without a single data point to back up the hypotheses he was making. And it's like, hey, if I could just say whatever I want and not have to prove any of it, it'd be a really easy world to live in. So I appreciate that about you. But I'm going to ask you, last question, a couple of things that Beau Agnello believes in that have helped you be able to advance so rapidly in your career.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. My head's not going to fit through the door now, so very, very kind of you. I think for me, I never try to have any ego. I think that I think that I've been very fortunate and had a lot of people that trusted me and gave me the freedom to fail and fail fast, and let me skin my knee but not break my leg. I don't I don't think there's any really it's just a title, right? If anything, I'm the chief janitor of the company, and if I do my job right, it shouldn't be glamorous. I One of my favorite movies is a documentary from a few years ago. It's called Jiro Dreams of Sushi, and it's about this world famous sushi chef in Japan. When the movie came out, he was 85 years old, and he'd been working in the sushi industry for 75 years. And for the first few years that you work at his restaurant, you just learn how to make rice. And when you've worked at the restaurant for 10 years doing prep work, he lets you cook eggs and you make tamago. And then you have to cook eggs for 4 or 5 months before he lets you finally move on 10 years and a few hundred failed omelets to fish. And there's this really lovely little movie about perfecting your craft. And look, I can't cook an omelet. I can't make sushi. I was never any good at playing music. I can't dunk a basketball, but I can rent the hell out of some storage units. So for me, I'm just trying to perfect my craft, right? So I'm not too self-important about it. I just love trying to be a craftsman, and there's a lot of satisfaction in trying to get a little bit better at running storage facilities every day, and hopefully that shows up in the product we put forth to our customers. I've tried to figure out, Thaddeus, how many storage facilities I've visited in my life. I'm not going to count, but I think it's probably about 3,000. And new facilities, not individual visits, but I think I've been to about 3,000 storage facilities. And I just assume that when I walk in, I've got something that I can learn from the person there. And I try to make sure that I soak it up and, again, just try to get a little bit better every day at cooking rice.
Man, you're inspiring to listen to, Beau. I had such a great time listening to you on the virtual summit. Even more fun getting to ask questions personally and on the podcast. And I can rent the hell out of some self storage. That line will stay with me for the rest of my life. Amazing time. Thank you so much for coming so prepared with so much information. And listen, nothing better than data, right? It's absolutely important that you understand what it is you're talking about based in facts. And so really appreciate you bringing so much knowledge and sharing it with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I talked too much about sushi, so I'm going to go grab some lunch now.
I'm going to go make an omelet, to be honest with you. That was fantastic. Listen, that's it for this week's episode of the Self Storage Made Simple show. Thanks to the COO of Go Store, Beau Agnello, for sharing so much information with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you to PropRise, who are the sponsors of the show. We appreciate them. They help you outpace the self-storage industry in finding new deals. You can check them out at www.proprise.io and get a demo of their software. It's fantastic. And we will see you guys next week.